And before we get started with this new unit, we're going to do a quick review or a warm-up on information that we've already covered. So those of you who are face-to-face, turn to the person closest to you. Y'all may have to do in groups of like 3 or something. Or do we have an even? No, we do have an even number. Okay, so pick one partner in the class, and I want you to work through each of these questions: the process of memory, the 3 theories of emotion, and the limbic system. Those of you who are at home, go ahead and do this, but post your answers privately in the chat. So I'm gonna give y'all about 10 minutes to do this. And then at 11:22, we're going to go over the answers. So go ahead and rearrange as you need. Okay, so the answer to number 1, the first stage in memory is encoding. We encode iconic memory or echoic memory, okay, visual or auditory. With that sensory memory, we have the initial encoding. If we practice it over and over again, it gets moved into storage, the first storage being short-term memory, okay? If we continue to repeat that information, eventually it gets moved into long-term memory, which is where we hit retrieval, of where we remember that information. Okay, so you go from working memory to short-term memory to long-term memory, encoding, storage, and retrieval. Semantic encoding is the best form of encoding if you want to enhance your retention of that information. What does semantic encoding mean? What does the word semantic mean? Y'all don't do membean anymore? Yeah, the meaning of something. Okay, so if you encode something semantically, that means that you are attaching it to other memories. You're giving it a personal meaning. Okay, if I am learning a foreign language, then I'm going to tie some of that foreign language to cognates in my native language. So family, familia. Okay, that would make sense for me. That's adding meaning to what you're trying to learn. That's going to establish it in your long-term memory more efficiently. Okay, with the emotional theories, you have the Cannon-Bard theory, the James-Lange theory, and the Schotter two-factor theory. Okay, so the Cannon-Bard theory, remember we think of cannons firing at the same time. You have the emotion and the physical response. Is there cognition in the Cannon-Bard theory? No, they're both happening at the same time. In the James-Lange theory, this is a causal relationship. You have a physical reaction to something, and that causes your emotion. Okay, but that does not include cognition within that. With the two-factor theory, this does include cognition because you're labeling the emotion. You are evaluating the physical response that you're going through, and you think, oh, I must be shaking because I'm hungry, or I must be shaking because I'm cold, or because I'm scared. Okay, so you interpret based on the context of your environment. The limbic system deals with memory. Okay, it deals with emotions. It deals with drives. So you have the hypothalamus, which is the master gland. It controls our growth and it controls the functions within our body, particularly the sympathetic nervous system. The hippocampus, which is primarily focused on memory. The pituitary gland, which deals with growth. The thalamus, which is the relay system that sends our senses to the appropriate lobes for perception. And the amygdala, which deals with feelings of emotion. What particular emotions are triggered in the amygdala? Fear and aggression. Good. Anger. Okay, so think fight or flight. That's your amygdala. Okay, fight or flight. Are we good on the warm-up? All right, then let's start the unit. This unit is, well, it's supposed to say unit 9. It used to be unit 11 and also unit 14. There's been a lot of changes in the curriculum. So this is unit 9, social psychology. And social psychology is just the scientific study of how we think about, influence, and relate to one another. So this first PowerPoint, I know it says day 1. We're not going to finish this in a day. Okay, this first PowerPoint deals with attribution theory, attitudes, conformity, and obedience. There are some key words that you're going to need to be familiar for this unit. Let me zoom out so you can actually see them. That would be nice. Okay, we have social cognition. Social cognition is just how we think about social situations. How do we think about ourselves? How do we think about others? Okay, so if you say, oh, that person's so awkward, or oh, I'm so awkward, okay, that is social cognition. Social influence is how we're influenced by others. What's another way of saying that? A colloquial way that y'all are familiar with? Have people in your social groups ever tried to pressure you to do something?
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure. Okay, so social influence can be negative influence like peer pressure, or it could be positive influence. Like a competitive environment where you all strive to do your best. Okay, so it can have positive and negative connotations. Social behavior is exactly what it sounds like, how we behave in social situations. Okay, and then social situation, that is whenever we are engaged in interaction with others. Okay, so this classroom is a social interaction. At the lunchroom, you'll have social interactions or social situations. And these social situations can influence or even control your behavior. Say in the lunch scenario, y'all will go outside, play Frisbee, sit on the grass, take your masks off. Okay, that controls your social behavior. You're allowed to do those particular behaviors in that context. But if y'all came in here and started playing Frisbee or taking your masks off or sitting on the floor, then we'd have a problem. Okay, you have a social schema for what the classroom is supposed to look like and what lunchtime is supposed to look like. So it controls and influences your behavior, even if you're not consciously thinking about how it does so. Does that make sense so far? All right, so we're going to talk about a number of famous experiments as it relates to the field of social psychology. You're going to need to be familiar with all of these experiments. You have the Asch line experiment. That's very interesting because it shows the influence of group pressure, even if the group isn't trying to exert pressure on another member of the group. The Milgram's obedience study, which shows how far people are willing to go to respond to an authority figure, even if what they're doing is wrong. And the Zimbardo's prison study, which there's even a movie made about that in 2015, where a bunch of college students were given the role of either prisoner or prison guard, and then things got real messed up real fast. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of these individually. The first one being the line experiment. Okay, so this was tested by Solomon Asch, and what he would do is he would have, like, say 7 people in a room, and all of them were shown different slides with different sized lines. Now, each person in the room was supposed to identify which of those lines is the same length as the one on the left. Okay, so if y'all are looking at this example right here on the screen, which line, A, B, or C, matches the one on the first index card? C. Okay, now what they did here was they had 7 Confederates. Okay, that doesn't mean like someone from the South. Okay, a Confederate in a psychological experiment is someone who's in on the experiment. They know what it's testing, they know what it's about, and they're trying to fulfill a certain role. Okay, so let's say that all of you are Confederates except for Lexi. Okay, Lexi is the only one who doesn't know about this experiment. Y'all have been instructed by the people running this experiment that you're supposed to pick the wrong answer. So when this comes up, you're not supposed to say C. You're supposed to say A or B. So one at a time, you go in order. Micaiah says B. Charlie says B. Eli says B. Reagan says B. Tatum says B. None of them look at Lexi like, better put B. Okay, none of them put pressure on her or look disapprovingly if she gives a different answer. But what they found is that the person who's not in on the experiment wants to conform with the rest of the group, even if they know that the answer is wrong. So more likely than not, Lexi is going to respond with the wrong answer. So if all the Confederates choose the wrong answer, conformity is going to increase. But what happens if someone in the Confederate group chooses the right answer? Let's say everyone except Micaiah said B, but Micaiah says C. She says the right answer. Then that pressure for conformity is not as strong, and Lexi feels more able to give the correct answer. So you can apply this to just regular life in general. If you're out with a bunch of friends and all of them are doing one thing that you know is wrong, but then one person stands up and says, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to go home, then you feel a lot more comfortable doing the same thing because you weren't the one that had to break with the group. Okay? So this is important because it shows the level to which we'll go to maintain conformity. Even if no one's pressuring you directly, like sending dirty looks your way or scoffing, you still want to fit in with the group. Does that make sense so far? Stanley Milgram is going to conduct a experiment on obedience using electric shock. Okay, now no one's actually going to get shocked, but the people involved in the study don't necessarily need to do that. So let's say that all of y'all are subjects in this experiment. You come to the experiment and I'm the authority figure, okay? I tell you, hey, here are some questions that you're going to ask a student. Now the student is a Confederate. They're on the other side of the barrier. They're the ones supposedly hooked up to the electric shock system, and they know that they're not going to be shocked. They know that they need to give the wrong answer. So they're in on all of this. You're the only one who doesn't know. So the experimenter tells you, you're going to be the teacher. We have some questions and answers. We want you to ask the questions to the student. And if he gets it right, awesome. If he gets it wrong, you need to shock him. And the shocks go from mild, moderate, severe. So you're shocked when you give the wrong answer. And each wrong answer that you give is going to increase the level of shock. Now, if you just ask somebody hypothetically, would you shock somebody for getting the wrong answer on a quiz? Most people are going to answer no, because shocking people is bad. Would you give somebody a 450 millivolt shock for answering a math question wrong? No, that could like induce cardiac arrest. But even though people say they wouldn't do something like that, they actually, more often than not, respond by conforming or being obedient to the authority figure. Okay, so the researcher, the authority figure in the room telling them, hey, you need to shock them, was able to get about 2/3 of his subjects to comply with the demands, even up to the full shock amount of 450 volts. So over 60% of the people followed through and went as high as possible with the shocks because an authority figure was telling them to do so. The old adage of, oh, I was just following orders. Now they did this test over and over again to see if there are any factors that could change that level of compliance. For instance, if they could see or hear the subject. If you're shocking somebody and you see pain or you see their reaction to it, you're less likely to move up in the level of voltage. That makes sense, right? Because out of sight, out of mind. But if it's right there in front of you, then it becomes more real. Also, the closeness or the legitimacy of the authority figure. If the researcher is right there in the room with you, wearing a white lab coat and holding a stack of important looking papers, then you're more likely to comply with the orders to increase the shock. But if a janitor comes in and says, hey, you need to move that shock up to 450 volts, you're less likely to comply. Okay, but what this has found is that we are very, very likely to comply with authority figures, even if it goes against our own moral judgments. Does that make sense so far? Another issue with this study is that they didn't debrief the people who were a part of it. So imagine you come in and you're supposed to be the teacher. You're supposed to be the one delivering the shocks. And you think that you've shocked people. You think that you've actually, that one person even thought that he had killed somebody because he thought he had given the guy a heart attack because he had shocked the 450 and then the guy didn't talk anymore. And so no one told them afterwards, hey, this was an experiment. You actually weren't shocking anybody. We were just studying conformity. And so these people just went back to their lives and like had mental breakdowns because they thought that they had literally harmed another human being. So that's why whenever you do an experiment, there are rules now. You have to debrief the subjects. You have to tell them, this is what we're studying. This is how we set it up. Okay, and make sure that no mental or physical harm results from that. Pretty good rule. The next experiment that we're going to look at is the Stanford prison study, which was done by Philip Zimbardo. Okay, so with this, he created a mock prison. Okay, this is actually approved by the Institutional Review Board, which is the board that has to approve all experiments to make sure that they're humane, but it's going to lead to a crackdown on those approvals because this kind of gets out of hand. So in this mock prison, he takes students, college students, and randomly assigns them the role of guard or prisoner. Okay, now at first everything was fine. The prisoners are taken in by the actual police department, okay, to help along with this, getting them into the reality of it, into the role playing. And then they're brought to the college and they're put in this mock prison. They're brought through the induction process of having to get naked and deloused and getting their clothing. There's an isolation cell set up. They're moved into these beds and they're given a bucket for the bathroom, but they're free to leave at any time. Okay, the guards wear uniforms, they have batons, they're specifically told not to hit anybody, but yeah, they do. And they're wearing sunglasses to try and depersonalize them. What happens is that they very rapidly become sadistic. The prisoners go into their role of being prisoners, even though supposedly they knew that they could leave at any time, and the guards become extremely sadistic and controlling over the prisoners. Okay, another woman who came in on the experiment that was working with Zimbardo actually forced them to end the experiment because it had gotten so out of hand. This resulted in the coining of the term the Lucifer Effect. Okay, from this study, we get the belief that the absence of an authority figure to reinforce proper conduct turned normal, non-sadistic individuals into aggressive tormentors. So if you take away that authority figure and just leave people to these roles, to these social schema, they're going to fulfill those stereotypes, okay, of the people in power versus the people not in power. Okay, so this could have real life application when it comes to places like Guantanamo Bay. Okay, if you have a prison system anywhere, you need internal review, effective internal review to make sure that you don't have individuals stepping outside of the bounds of their role. Are we good so far?